On this episode of Travel with T-Bone, we're going to talk about 5 signs that show you're unhappy while living abroad. Keep watching. Welcome to the Travel with T-Bone channel, where you will get tips for living abroad, tips for learning languages, as well as the sights and sounds of places you'll never see in your country once a week, every Friday. So this week we're going to talk about 5 signs that show you're unhappy while living abroad. And the first thing is whether or not you're in or out of the Goldilocks zone. Everybody knows the story of Goldilocks. It's the story of the 3 bears. This porridge is just right, too hot, too cold. And the same principle applies when you're living abroad. You want to be in a place where you're working the right amount, but not working too much or not working too little. I have a story of a friend who shall remain nameless, who ended up working 7 days a week all the time, every single day. And she kept working and working and working and working and working and working and working. And eventually she was at that high point of this picture. You can see that it's a complete meltdown. She had a complete meltdown. She broke up with somebody. She got really wasted. She was talking about jumping out of the story of her 16th floor apartment and killing herself, and I was just like, holy shit. It was a lot to deal with, and she was unhappy because she was outside of her Goldilocks zone. The average amount of work you should be doing a week is about 40, and you should keep it to about 5 days a week. If you do 6 or 7, that sort of stress, anxiety from actually working the day, even if it's in an hour, can take its toll on you and build up. The next sign that you may be unhappy when living abroad is living in quadrant 4, the 4 quadrants of Stephen Covey. There is urgent and important, not urgent but important, urgent but not important, and not urgent, not important. The worst one you can possibly be in is not urgent, not important. I have fallen trapped to this category when I was living in Japan. I spent about 2 months doing not urgent and not important things. Like it says, it could be trivia, busy work, time wasters, private calls, internet surfing, pleasant activities such as League of Legends. My not urgent, not important was playing League of Legends, and holy hell, did I play a lot of League of Legends. I probably played it for about 8 hours every day for about 2 months, and I began to feel really depressed and bored because I was doing the same thing again and again, and I was not planning to do anything. I was not preventing anything. I was not building any relationships. I just play online matches with random people. This was not a new opportunity for me, and I was not learning or developing any sort of skills that helped me feel like I was growing as a person. So definitely notice if you are in quadrant 4. That could be watching YouTube videos all the time because you got your VPN and you're like, oh, there's nothing to do. Or it could just be, watching movie after movie after movie. A little bit is fine. I completely love movies and I love games. But if it's a constant thing where you're not actually producing anything, then yeah, you're in quadrant 4 and you're kind of screwing yourself for the long term. So definitely get out of quadrant 4 and into quadrant 2. The next sign that is discounting the positives and negative filtering. So despite the fact that there's good things happening in your life, you are discounting it. You're like, oh, that's the way it's supposed to be, instead of actually being appreciative for it, which I talk about in my 5 ways to be happy while living abroad video. And then the negative filtering part is only seeing the negatives in the situation instead of seeing the positives. And that can be very, very unhealthy because then it creates this negative feedback loop. And it makes you sad. So what you want to do is, feel better. So you go to movies, you go to games, you go to TV, some sort of thing that will put you in quadrant 4, that I talked about earlier, and you kind of go into this cycle of depression where you're not actually being productive, you're not creating yourself, and you're not building anything meaningful for the future. The next one comes from the same article in The Atlantic, The Coddling of the American Mind, which I have a link to in the description below, is overgeneralizing. Holy moly, do I hear this all the time, especially in expat circles. And if you catch yourself in an expat circle that's constantly overgeneralizing, maybe it's best to, take a step back and keep a distance from that sort of a crowd because it can bring down your experience while living abroad. The overgeneralizing is based on one experience that, oh, this is how it is in China, or this is how it is in Japan, or this is how it is in South Korea, or whatever country that you're living in because of one bad thing happens. And I hear this so often, and it's really easy to forget that you're living in one small place of a much greater country. For example, I only live in Foshan, so I don't want to say this is how China is based on my experiences living in Shunde of Foshan, right? That would be kind of crazy, and it is crazy because different areas, even within the same city, have different things. And that is multiplied by 1,000,000 when you go throughout different areas of a country, because you can see different kinds of food, different kinds of unique places, different attitudes and people, and just a totally unique sort of mindset of how diverse and interesting and complicated a culture is, rather than being able to sum it up in just a few quick sentences of, oh, this is how China is, or this is how China isn't. Last one is blaming. Blaming is a very, very big thing because you're blaming everyone else for your own problems except yourself, which is probably the person who is causing the most grief, which it is. And that's something that you should learn to do, is take as much as you can, within reason, of what is actually your fault and what can you change. For me, this was a really, really hard life lesson to learn, and it took me maybe a year or two. I think I was definitely living in Japan, and I was blaming everyone else for my own unhappiness. I was making overgeneralizations about how Japan was and what it wasn't, and I was honestly kind of living in denial of what I wanted my experience in Japan to be. Because when I was growing up as a kid, my thoughts and ideas of Japan were growing up from Super Nintendo and Nintendo 64 and anime and manga, and I thought, wow, this is really great. This is what Japan's going to be like. And then I go there and I'm like, holy moly, it's completely different than what I thought. But I really wanted it to be what I thought it was, instead of how it actually was. And I didn't accept how the country actually was. I didn't accept the tatemae, I didn't accept the uchisoto, I didn't accept the honne, and I didn't accept all of the nuances that actually exist within Japanese culture. And it left me very, very frustrated, and I was constantly blaming everyone and everything around me for why I was so unhappy. And then I had to realize, hey, I can't change a thing. People are going to go on with their lives, and they're going to be fine with or without me. But it's better to be a positive force, actually have friends and build relationships and create something more, rather than blaming everyone else and kind of becoming a wrecking ball where no one wants to be around you. That was such a hard life lesson for me to learn, because I was a wrecking ball at one point, and I was like, oh my God, blaming everyone else except yourself. And because of that, when I finally learned to accept that, when I finally learned to confront my own challenges, to actually try to improve my Japanese and actually make something of myself, I moved from an English teacher to a Japanese translator. And I had a much, much better life. I was socializing, I had friends, I went out to movies, had dinners, and I had a very healthy sort of life towards the end of my time in Japan, which I'm very, very grateful for. So that's all for this week's top 5 signs you might be unhappy while living abroad. If you like this video, please give it a like. If you dislike this video, don't give it a dislike, but please leave reasons why in the comment section below. And subscribe, and share. Thanks for watching.